Want to thank you so much for joining us. I'm Mark Schumacher, along with Shannon Williams here from the Home Furnishings Association, and this is our weekly webinar. And today we are talking about driving traffic. Did we get your attention? That's what everybody's talking about right now, but this is going to be through data insights. We're going to be looking today at how to use the data you have, what data to look for, and then things like predictive analytics and personalized marketing, data tracking, things of that sort. We've got a great panel today that's going to take us down that pathway. Before I introduce everybody, let me just do a little bit of housekeeping here. First and foremost, bottom of the screen, there is a Q&A little tab. If you have a question, tap on there, type it in, and we will get to it as quickly as we can and do our best to get to all questions that you have. That's number one. Number two, myhfa.org/webinar is where our entire library of webinars exists. This one will join it tomorrow. So if you have any challenge in your business and you're looking for some answers and some insights, that's the first place that you should go, myhfa.org/webinar. And I also always like to thank Synchrony. They are the sponsor of our education here and our thought leadership in that subject. So let me introduce you to our panel today. We have, speaking of Synchrony, we have Vasant Adur. He's the head of analytics for the home and auto segment of Synchrony. He has a ton of experience in development of analytics solutions to drive transformational customer experience, and that's something that everybody is striving for. So Vasant, we thank you for being here today. We also have Boaz Grinvald joining us. He's General Manager of E-commerce Analytics at Bright Data. He's part of their analytics division there, and he's got a lot of background in e-commerce, digital marketing, and new product development. So Boaz, thank you for being here all the way from Israel. Also, we have Alexander Brazil here. He's a senior product lead at Shopify. He's got some experience dealing with Amazon, Facebook, Google, et cetera. He's going to bring an awful lot of insights as well. Alexander, we thank you so much for being here as well and your expertise on the shopping experience. And we round this out with Dan Bennett, the CMO of Furniture.com. That is a furniture platform that's not just B2C, but it's also B2B. And they're finding ways of making furniture shopping easy, which is terrific. That's exactly what everybody wants these days as well. But I'm also really happy to bring in and to introduce somebody that really doesn't need much of an introduction. Shannon Williams is our incoming CEO here at HFA. She's going to lead today's discussion. Shannon, take it away, and gentlemen, have a great discussion.
Thanks so much, Mark. Well, I really appreciate you guys all coming in today to talk about driving traffic. It's a hot topic that a lot of retailers have been reaching out to us and asking lots of questions. So today specifically, I want to talk about predictive analytics. So can you guys talk to me a little bit more about exactly what predictive analytics is and how that differs from like the traditional analytics?
Sure. Let me jump in and give it a quick shot. Basically, predictive analytics is about trying to predict future performance based on models that look at the past. So if I did X in this month, what am I going to do next month? But the ideal is not just to predict my own performance, but to predict the category's performance. And if I can look at and model that, I can not only see how potentially successful I am, but also I can see how I compare to the category. So maybe I'm going to hopefully grow 5% next month, but the category is growing 6%. So basically I'm under indexing. So the idea with predictive analytics is not just to look at where I'm heading, but where the competition and everybody else is heading.
Thank you for that. Now, can anyone give us some examples on exactly how retailers who have actually used predictive analytics might be using them to understand either market trends or consumer data?
So, Shannon, in our world within Synchrony, I mean, the way we work with our retailers, our partners are thinking about promo financing. You know, when we think about big ticket items, promo financing is very important. Customers are looking for choice and flexibility. So it's very important to make sure we have the right side of offer strategy, which is allowing retailers to attract customers into the stores. So we actually do a lot of optimization work, trying to understand, looking at past behaviors to see what type of promotional terms or durations, whether it's a deferred financing or it's an equal payment with no interest, or even looking at terms, right? Whether it's a 12-month program or a 24-month program, trying to understand the right mix, which allows us to understand like what value the customers are getting through these promotional offers. And then we try to come back to our partners to give them recommendation as to how they should be optimizing and creating these offer constructs depending upon the seasonality of the situation or the trends that we are observing in the marketplace to stay competitive and just make sure we are attracting the right customers into the store. So there's a lot of predictive analytics that goes behind that type of exercise. So that's one example from our work.
One of the things that, from Furniture.com's perspective, is that something that could be considered lacking in the furniture industry would be a sense of standardization of data. So there are a variety of big platforms which will remain unnamed that have a lot of data, but they keep it behind their own walled garden. What we're finding through the Furniture.com platform and the way that we standardize our feed and therefore standardize our data is that we're able to think about these broader pools of data that typically aren't seen even in individual large retailers. And that's starting to give us a sense of, and my perspective is obviously the marketing lens, but it's starting to give us a sense of, as Boaz said, that future casting, the capability of thinking about how this broadest data set will behave outside of just the typical promotional and seasonal moments in the year that we're very familiar with in furniture. So that is one of the founding components we think of the Furniture.com platform is a broadening, a deepening of the understanding as it relates to standardization of data.
Thank you for
Yes,
that. Go ahead, Alex.
definitely agree, Dan. Definitely agree, and there's multiple aspects. Basically, it's about predicting the future. So if you see that there's a trending rising cost of advertising in a certain heating up subcategory, that definitely needs to go into your pricing models, because otherwise, you're going to lose your margins, because manufacturing cost is supposed to be fixed, and so it really kind of spans the whole gamut.
Shannon, I don't want to sort of belabor just your first question, but it's such a good one. If you don't mind me jumping in the second time, the other thing that, candidly, I think when we take a question or an idea like predictive data, which is a big topic at the moment, the thing that we're trying to establish and help our partners bring to life is an ability to identify higher intent. And this is specific for us, of course, but the ability for us to look at what has happened before, as Boaz mentioned, and recognize how we might be able to model that, understand that, and then share that, so that what we're actually sharing is not just the data behind it, because that's to some extent not helpful, but we're able to share indicators of intent and pass those folks along. So for me, it's all about what are the big core pieces we're taking out of it, and for us, I think intent is a big one.
Alex, I see you shaking your head. Is that something you agree with?
It is. I was going to talk about trying to predict high propensity buyers. I think there's sort of like two different sides of the coin here. One side is measurement, like how do I understand what has occurred, and then optimizing towards whatever that objective is via a bunch of features that I can collect on either people or on aggregates, right? So can I look at various regions and some other dimension and correlate that with that measurement, and then get an understanding of who is likely to buy my product or the product that I'm trying to optimize for, and then how did it actually perform in practice. And so they're really just two sides of the same coin, and both need to be in place.
I hear you guys talking a lot about just like using data analytics or the predictive analytics to really look at past trends. And it just keeps reminding me of that saying, like, principle is not bound by precedence. And how do you look at just the unprecedented times that retailers have been going through, this whole industry has been going through with supply chain and COVID and fluctuating demand, and use past information to help predict uncertain futures?
I think it depends on the definition of past to some extent. So to clarify that a little, the delta between the delta between how we're thinking about data now and how we might have thought about it traditionally or thought about traditional forecasting, the force multiplier in there has been the fact that it's now less time consuming. It doesn't require as much, at least in our experience, it doesn't require as much analysis and interpretation because a lot of it is modeled or done, by a variety of machine learning tools that I'm certainly not qualified to talk about. But the nature of that, Shannon, has sped up the ability for us to understand what past might look like. So it might be that you're looking, Labor Day to Labor Day as you think about promotional periods. But for us, our ability is to look back over. We look back at a dashboard over, say, even just 4 weeks. And if you can take seasonality out of it, which isn't easy in furniture, but for us, it gives us a sense, it can give us a sense of what to take action on. So we're not depending upon those bigger sort of seismic shifts that you just mentioned. It isn't necessarily easy. We built a platform specifically to do it, but I think it's critical.
And I think
Yes, sorry, Shannon, just chiming in with Dan here. I think Dan is absolutely right. The world is spinning faster these days, and everybody, I guess, is looking at a much shorter term ahead. They don't need to look, years ahead. Manufacturing is easier. Things change so dramatically and so quickly that we see clients just looking at maybe a season ahead. Seasonality definitely breaks up the year into shorter periods of time. So, winter time, everybody's looking for the TV stands with the electric fireplaces in them. And, come spring, they're looking for something else. And so you don't really need to predict too far into the future. You just need to kind of look a season ahead and respond very, very quickly, which, like Dan pointed out, there's a lot of tools out there that already help you do that.
I think there's also a lot of tools that help you quantify that uncertainty these days. And I think if whatever tool you're using doesn't allow you to do that, you should probably look for some other tools. So you have an estimate. What is the error bar around that? Because you should really have some idea of how far south either direction that can go.
Alex, you're saying there's some tools available. Can you speak to some of the different tools that you're aware of that a retailer might be able to lean into to find some data to use to forecast?
I'd rather not mention particular tools, but I think more just in the ways of thinking about these problems. So, for example, you could take a more Bayesian approach to things, where each prediction that you make will have a distribution of outcomes, and you will have some idea of the thresholds either way from your prediction. And then by allowing yourself to quantify that uncertainty, I don't know how well this will apply. I'm more on the marketing / propensity side, so I don't know how this would be on forecasting. But if I'm predicting that this segment will drive, say, 3 million in revenue, but I'm also saying plus or minus 5 million either way, you can basically say, okay, you know what, that prediction is not that helpful to me. And I think I think we should be explicit in those statements and in that inference, that you should know how much uncertainty is in those estimates, in my opinion.
And I think if we can go back to the forecasting mechanism, right, I think a lot also depends upon the historical data. So in our world, as we think about portfolios, as we think about consumer behaviors, for us, it's very important to understand what type of consumers are actually coming in through the book of the business, right? And as we try to figure out the different tranches of the customer profiles, it helps us to understand what type of behaviors are they exhibiting, right? And when you do that trending analysis and trying to figure out futuristically, what type of consumers you expect to attract, then you're able to synthesize that information and try to create those weightings and mixes to create your curves, right? Which go into your planning and your forecasting process, right? So that's one way of looking at, historical trends, breaking them down into different dimensions, which are very relevant, and then trying to use that to create some forward-looking views.
But if you think about connecting this to how perhaps some of the folks listening to this, are trying to materialize this in their own businesses, the tools question is is a good one, Shannon. And we've all seen those word clouds where there's a million tools. It's intimidating. But if you boil it down to its core, and certainly how we think about it at furniture.com, I mean, the idea of thinking about refining a your own CDP, so you have a sense of a variety of sources coming into one place, so you have a sense of truth there. We're a little bit different because we're sort of a technology company in service of furniture because we partner with retailers, but we have taken the effort and the risk, candidly, to build our own in-house machine learning and AI tools so we can take that data, and like I said earlier, we can process it more quickly than perhaps we would have been able to in the past. Then from a marketing point of view, you take those two things. So a place to store your data and understand it, a tool to help you filter it like AI or ML. But then what is the marketing automation platform that you want to layer on top of that? So you can think about personalization at scale. How do you think about dynamically delivering content? Because that can be a pain in the butt, candidly, but there's a variety of partners that help us do that. So you start with this big lake and you end up filtering it down to a point that I think, frankly, we're almost at a point now where it's like one-to-one. How personalized is your site experience? How personalized are your marketing messages, your CRM, et cetera, et cetera?
Thank you. Yeah, we had one of our retail members chime in and say that they have found some tools that are able to predict likelihood of conversion within 5 clicks. And so HFA will go out to market and see what kind of tools are available and vet them and help our members a little bit more closely. Something I've heard you guys say is, looking at the type of customer, if you scale out, what kind of data is the most valuable for retailers in understanding just their customers' behavior?
So, as I think about consumer behaviors, a lot has to do with trying to understand who is buying, what are they buying, when are they buying, and how are they buying, right? So if you conceptualize that whole thought process around as you address those questions, you're able to then kind of stitch together a view around who your typical customer is. And the more information you can gather about your consumers, alongside getting information from data aggregators out there in the industry to kind of supplement that information to figure out more holistically around your consumers, what is happening with the retailer, as well as what they may be doing outside of the retail space, then you have a better understanding of what is motivating them to actually be making such a large big ticket purchase, as an example, right? And then you also have a lot of industry-based benchmarking macro information out there, which you can understand the consumer spending trends. We have seen that during COVID. Right after COVID, there was a lot of, pull forward spending in furniture categories because people wanted to update their home offices, right? But now you're seeing that shift in spending moving away from big tickets to more, travel-based and entertainment-based because the sentiments are shifting. So in order to understand all of that dynamics and putting that all together would allow you to then think about how you should be positioning your offers in the marketplace.
It's there's a statistic that we talk about when we're meeting partners, and it's a statistic that might vary week to week or month to month, but roughly 3/4 of all furniture shoppers don't search by brand, they search by attribute. And what that means for us is, as I mentioned earlier, the ability for an individual brand you can use all the data you want, but you have to have extremely deep pockets to be able to really penetrate an audience that doesn't typically search by brand. So when we think about the what sources we're looking at, as per the question, I think you have to. I actually think there's still a bunch of old school thinking that's reasonably appropriate here as it relates to customer demographics, transaction data, website analytics. Now it's social media analytics, email marketing. It's a fairly long list, 10 or 12 key points. It doesn't help necessarily. There's no silver bullet in there for identifying, finding, and being effective with bringing in high intent shoppers. I mean, that's the challenge we're trying to overcome. but I do think developing technologies that can sit as a layer on top of all those things will make all retailers more effective in that regard.
Whether you can get the data is a question, but Dan called it old school. At my time at Facebook, one of the strongest indicators of a buyer would be demographic. So if similar demographics to your prior purchasers will definitely correlate strongly, I think, with your your future buyers. The other thing, again, whether you have this feature or not, one thing we found in our investigations is, in our case, associative brands. So let's say you've got 1,000 people who buy from store A and 300 of them also buy from store B. We would call that brand overlap or shop overlap. Both of them are strong predictors to buy from each other, right? So the remaining people that didn't buy from one would also buy from another. So those are two, like some of those traditional features they're still very valuable to this day. And then there's other ones that whether you can get them or not is a separate question. But I find the association between if people are buying from A and from B in high amounts, then finding more people that buy from A or for B is a good predictor of the other.
And Alex, on that note, right, market basket analysis is something similar, right? Where you're looking at association-based rules to figure out, hey, if you're buying, let's say, a product set A, what would be your next likelihood of buying product set B, right? So if you can actually create that narrative and create that analytic view for your clients, I think that goes a long way in predicting and even personalizing future promotions and campaigns and marketing messages so that we can create that engagement strategies.
And I think in today's world, we also made a lot of progress on behavioral sciences and looking at what people actually, vote with their wallet on. What are they buying? What's trending? And there's even research, I think by PwC, that says that the retailers that look at, buyer behavior and project that into their actions, things like, the size of the purchase, what items they're purchasing, what is trending, how would they even search for on the website, in the search engine pages, can actually grow their margins by 3 to 5 points. So I think there's also a lot of proof in the pudding, as they say. You look at what people actually buy, and you just play to your strengths. In addition, every typically retailer has its own kind of audience. So you got I guess a target audience will always be different than an Amazon audience, and on and on. And so you really kind of want to learn from what's working for you and amplifying that.
Boaz, you had mentioned earlier kind of benchmarking what you're finding is the data that's being pulled out of like a category. What are you benchmarking to, or what do you suggest retailers benchmark to?
So first and foremost, the competitors for sure. Again, like a Walmart and an Amazon or a Target, you always want to kind of see what the neighbors are doing. It spans across typically, first of all, assortment. We have a virtual shelf now, so it's harder to see. It's not the physical shelf where you can actually audit it. And so maybe my neighbor has something really cool and shiny on the shelf that I don't have. Maybe it's their own, or maybe it's just new sellers coming from wherever. And so comparing assortments is very important. And then they typically also want to make sure that if they have the right assortment, it's competitively priced. So price bands are extremely important these days. I think Dan pointed out that 75 points of the buyers want to buy functionality, basically. They're looking for something. They're not looking for a brand. And typically they look for that something within a price band. So if you know what they're looking for and what the right price band is, that's your gateway to success.
When you speak about targeting a specific customer, and I heard Dan mention earlier, not having endless capital to advertise everywhere in all ways as deep as somebody might want to. Alex, can you speak maybe to why retargeting is important for conversion?
Sure. So just as a point of clarification, by retargeting, I am referring explicitly to someone who comes to the site and abandons, not someone who's been a customer prior. So it's actually fairly intuitive that someone who's come to your site you've probably already spent a lot of time and money getting them there, right? Like you may not know it, but generally speaking, someone doesn't randomly come to your brand unless something has prompted them to do so. And so you essentially have an audience that is, compared to the general population, an order of magnitude more likely to convert. And losing them in that final step can be, well, it's just not great. And so being able to target those individuals with ads will almost always perform better than if you were to blast a broad population. I think there are some genuine questions about what's known as the incrementality of those audiences. So how many of them would have converted anyways? And I do think with the tooling today that those audiences can be a little overvalued. But at Facebook, we did thousands of incrementality studies, and I'm pretty confident to say that for the vast majority of brands, that retargeting is still, even if you take out some of that inflation, is still a very valuable tactic.
So we're talking a lot about the customer that you know has visited your site, you've got some information, you've acquired them, and then they've abandoned. How do you actually know, how would a retailer know when a customer walks into their store, how would they find out this information too, and not just when they've visited their virtual site?
You know what? This might sound old-fashioned, but it's something that we deal with a lot, which is the idea of attribution, because we're a digital service, we're an aggregator as an experience, and part of our promise is driving to retail. The question, of course, as you mentioned, Shannon, is how do we bridge that? How do we close that loop? Someone said to me recently, somebody that, you know, a very well-known retailer said that there's a lot of power in word of mouth. So when you walk into a store, especially in furniture, if the salesperson is great, and they usually are, at least many of our partners, that they certainly are, the first question can often be, how do you find out? How do you hear about us? What brings you in today? Those sorts of things. And what this chap said to me was that you better believe as soon as they mention once, twice, or 3 times where they're coming from, in our case, of course, it was the idea of furniture.com, that's going to get up the chain pretty quickly. Oh, we've seen a few more people coming in from here. Now, it doesn't help us from a clear attribution point of view, but it does start to give us some anecdotal and some soft metrics, which we can't capture them as easily as we might like, but we think that there's value in that. There are other pieces that are a bit more techy, of course, as it relates to you know, discount codes, the ability for us to think about a QR code that can be rendered in store, even beaconing, geo-tracking, making sure we stay on the right side of history on that one. But you know, there's a variety of other things we think there. But I do think the word of mouth thing's pretty powerful. The digital to retail, I think there's still a story in that. Yeah,
so historically, the ad platforms anyways have tried to tackle it similar to methods that were just mentioned, right? Do I know your identifier, and then maybe I use your phone and find some way to try and stitch that together. I think those were always questionable in terms of their accuracy, and I think with the privacy changes, they've become increasingly difficult. I think you could still try it. You would just need enough of a sample size. In a weird way, I feel like we've kind of gone back to a lot of older measurement tactics. So media mix modeling, which tries to take dimensions of, say, time and spend on, let's say, TV, and try to do a regression and to figure out, you know, for every $1 I spend on TV, here's how many sales I see in store and that sort of thing. I think we're seeing a lot of movement towards that, or geo-lift studies, right? So in one market, ideally you have 2 stores in similar markets. One market gets some sort of treatment, and then you measure the effect versus the other. So a lot of these, frankly, older measurement methodologies that work on aggregates and try to compare exposure versus unexposed, I think are making a kind of comeback.
Vasant, you spoke a little bit earlier about how Synchrony uses predictive analytics to look at the mix of how promotion codes or how terms are used to set advertising and utilize financing to close customers. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of KPIs a retailer should be focused on, specifically to talk about that story of using financing to to drive customers and to drive traffic with customers?
So I think that's a great question, Shannon. So usually what we have observed is, in the large ticket space, consumers are looking for choice and flexibility, as I mentioned earlier on. And for them, it's very important that, if they're financing, their monthly payments are very reasonable, right? So they tend to, when they're walking into the store and they're seeking credit, it's very important for them to understand like what their monthly payment would look like if they're buying a $7,000 merchandise versus where it's a $4,000 merchandise. And if it's based on a particular financing option, whether we are talking about, 12-month offer versus a 60-month offer, right? What does it mean in the sense of my monthly payments? So trying to educate the customer in the store when it comes to monthly payments, that's very important, right? Then we also need to figure out like, what is the customer looking for, right? What type of financing are they looking for? Are they looking for equal payments, or they prefer to just have, smaller payments, which are deferred financing as an example? So giving them the choice is always helpful. And then what I would say is, as we are trying to gather the performance of, what drives traffic in the store, right? The question is, what's the conversion rates they're looking for? What's the traffic volumes they're bringing in? What is the products that they are selling? What's the conversion rate around those products, and so on? So that's what I would say. Everything is related to sales and volumes.
Thank you. Now, the same question for Alex and Dan. When we look at KPIs, what KPIs should retailers be really focused on to tell the marketing story?
It could be a dangerously boring list, I suspect. I think that for us it would be, on one side, there would be an understanding of the efficacy of the media, which would, again, talking pretty from a marketing point of view, what are the leads costing, right? And then all the associated data points within that. What I like outside of that would be, honestly, it would be going back to the intent point I made. So how are we able to find the appropriate in-market shopper, build intent through our experience, distribute that intent? And the intent would be time on site, so dwell time. It might be, to build on Alex's point a little bit earlier, how frequently they're coming back. What is the LTV of that particular traffic? What does the conversion rate look like of that traffic? Yeah, I think they're the sort of the two buckets, the two lenses I think about it through.
Alex, do you have you agree with that, or do you have additional thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. My North Star tends to be orders, and orders, like how much you spent for that order. I try to stay away from, and I understand that's not really what most people care about. They generally care about, revenue or even better profit. The reason I tend to stay away from revenue in particular, and then therefore profit, is I find it very noisy. And so you can have a bunch of effects that, one whale purchaser or one, a few outliers in your data sets can really throw off your insights. And so this is like my opinion, by the way. There's others who would have contention with it, but I try to look every time I'm doing a study. My goal is to move orders, and I sort of trust that if I'm moving orders with that media channel, that the rest will work itself out.
Thank you for that.
Dan,
you got us through that without it being dangerously boring, by the way.
Yeah. I feel like people glaze over when I start talking about this stuff. Maybe I'm in the right company for this. The other thing, just to build on that, where Alex is going there, for us, and I think particularly important in furniture, maybe only beaten out by something like automotive, would be understanding segmentation effectiveness. How effective are our identified segments, and what channels are moving the needle on them? How do we focus on those that are really over-indexing during a period? How do we dial back on those that aren't? And candidly, I think that a lot of what predictive analytics is powering, as you opened this conversation with, is probably our understanding to get a quicker, deeper understanding of that segmentation, and therefore, as we said, sort of not have to spend so deeply to be effective.
Boaz, we've heard Vasanth and Dan and Alex chime in on kind of the marketing and finance perspective about what retailer should be looking at for a KPI to tell that story. What are we missing? What other predictive analytics should a retailer be considering, or what KPIs should they be using in order to tell specific stories to keep a pulse on their business and drive traffic?
So I think benchmarking is like the key things, because you don't know what you don't know, right? You want to always measure yourself against someone else to know if you're doing good. Again, maybe you've grown 5 points and the market has grown 6 or 8 points. So that means you're shrinking basically. So I think you always want to find the benchmark. Plus, we're at an era, like everybody pointed out, that there's so much data out there. People are buying, you got credit card info, you got the marketplace information, and you can really kind of tap into the crowd wisdom, see where people are voting with their pockets. And so being able to learn from successes is suddenly something that is available potentially for everybody. You don't need to be a huge organization in order to know what your neighbor is selling. You can just tap into some public data. And so I think really the key here is to look at what others similar to you are doing and learn from their successes, learn what's working for them, because they basically went through all those rigorous cycles and figured it out. And it will change. It will always change because, seasonality, consumer tastes, ups and downs. And so you kind of need to track it. But I think today is much easier. Just learn from successes of others.
What would you say is the best way to collect data that's needed to make a decision? So if I'm a retailer and I'm operating my store, maybe I have the tools, maybe I don't. What are some different best practices or ways that a retailer could actually collect that and aggregate data?
So the ideal is obviously to engage with credible suppliers, folks who measure up to standards in terms of regulatory compliance and so on. And then you can. I'd encourage people. I'll try to get down to sort of best practices and tools level, and try to encourage people to kind of tap into tools that give them answers. You can tap into the raw data that's available as well from many potential vendors, but then you kind of have to build your own. It's not for everybody. And so I think, fortunately, like we've seen with ChatGPT and other examples, technology can rise to assist in many cases. And with, analyzing retail purchases, marketplace purchases, online purchases, in-store purchases.
I think it also goes back to the type of infrastructure.
What the neighbor is selling and how well they're doing.
Thanks so much, Boaz. Or go ahead, Alex.
I think you can also use your own data. Like you probably have plenty to at least start getting some insights on this, right? So your outcome variable, which is your orders per store. You know what you spent in that region, on various channels. And you might need some help modeling it, but you can even, you don't have to start super complicated. You can start with simple statistical models to try to predict, given my spend on these 6 channels, you could do something as simple as a regression and say, well, it looks like every dollar I put in channel X leads to 5 more orders. And then here's where it starts breaking off. So I'm not disagreeing that there's probably great data sets that you can get, but I do think if you're not starting with your own data, that you're missing an opportunity.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Boaz.
Go ahead, Dan.
To me, I think it's either people or money, or maybe both for the biggest companies. But you either, as Boaz said, you go and find great platforms and work with them, and to some extent, then you're not necessarily building it yourself. and maybe you're doing both, but or it's sort of kind of the approach we're taking, which is people. You know, we have a pretty big data science team in-house, big relative to us, and so we do a lot of this internally. We build it through simple front ends like a Looker or something like that, so it can be distributed at an executive level and understood. I mean, it's all about how easily can you make this stuff understood and actionable. But I think it's people or money. And if you're big enough, maybe if you're a Shopify or a Facebook, or like maybe it's both. In fact, definitely it's both. But I think it boils down to that.
And a lot
And
also
Alex, I
has to
think
do with the agility of the environment you are housing the data in, right? The more data you get in, you want to make sure you have that computational ability to be more agile in terms of doing these computational studies, whether it's reporting or whether it's doing analytics. So it depends upon, like, people and money, to your point, the infrastructure cost associated. That could dictate a lot in terms of how sophisticated you want your tools to be.
Right. And Alex, to your point, I think obviously your data is critical. You definitely want to start there, but without a benchmark, then you're kind of, shooting in the dark, basically.
I love what you said, Alex, about, you don't really need to go and get a tool, because not every retailer is at a place where money is the solution. Use what you have, maybe find somebody to model it. I would assume that with using like an outside company and finding those tools, you're going to have somebody that's really considering how accurate and reliable and compliant your data is. If you're doing this as a smaller retailer, maybe not using money to solve this issue, how do retailers ensure customer data that they collect is accurate and reliable and compliant with privacy regulations?
So, I mean, I think that's actually part of what you're paying for, right? Like, you're paying for the expertise on transforming the data, cleaning the data, putting it into a format, and like ensuring that it's doing those things. Is unfortunately, I don't think there's a simple answer to your question. I do think, and I am by no means a lawyer, so take this with a grain of salt. But I do think that customer data as it pertains to your business, e.g. like orders or sales, is something that you are able to model for measurement purposes and be generally in the clear. And so again, it would depend on the scale of your business, and you would need some expertise in this, but computing and some of the AI tools have gotten good enough that they could, I mean, I don't know if you'd be able to audit whether it's doing what you think it's doing, but you might be able to, if you really didn't have a lot of money for this, to get your data in a format and then basically say, hey, ChatGPT, do a linear regression for me with these values and tell me which channel is contributing, and maybe you'd get something from it. Again, that would be obviously depending on resources. I do think you want someone with some nominal training in this field, but I mean, again, you do start with what you have, and like if that's just Excel and some linear regressions, I mean, that's better than nothing. So, and then as your needs grow and as your sophistication grows, you start to look into more complicated tools and potentially professional services.
Earlier in the session, Vasant had mentioned personalization, and I think personalization is something we're hearing about across the board, and it's really on the top of most marketers' minds. How can data be used to personalize message and targeting?
So I can use an example. At Synchrony, we have our marketplace. That's basically a platform that allows us to connect our consumers with our retailers, as well as Synchrony as part of that ecosystem. So what we are trying to utilize that platform to be is increasingly as like a test bed, or even like for personalization strategies. Basically, if we know our consumers are actually on our properties and they're looking for certain type of products or certain purchases, the intent is there, we are able to then show them, appropriate offers from our relevant partners. So that way, at least we are meeting the moment for them, so that we are trying to tackle this real time, trying to make it more personalized for them. And hopefully that drives more conversion with our retailers. So that's kind of a conceptual way of how we are leveraging our marketplace.
So I think targeting really depends on having like that you kind of need professional services for. Or you need some partner who can collect the data on your behalf, find the people that are a good candidate for your business and help you target them. Shopify is we do this as well as part of, say, our audiences offering. A number of the people on this call are doing things similarly. That one is very difficult to do without outside help. I don't know how you do that with just your data alone.
I think the question, and apologies for the background noise, just as I get on with you guys, my landscapers show up and start blowing a leaf blower through my window. The question to me would be, and it depends upon the size of your business, I think. If we consider that many furniture retailers are smaller businesses, by no means small, but smaller. They're not all necessarily large regional players. The question comes down to how much of that do you want to be in full control of? How much of those levers do you want to pull? It's like when you get a graphic equalizer on a hi-fi, how many of those things do you want to constantly be moderating based on the type of music you want to listen to, versus, to Alex's point, where do you and how do you find partners that reliably can either manage or deliver traffic that has a lot of this already taken into account? What is that worth as it relates to an ongoing cost, or cost per transaction or something like that? And I think that's a binary decision, because if you decide you want to do more of it yourself, or if you're big enough you want to do all of it yourself, as many big companies do, then you're thinking about hiring. You're hiring a data team. We have a chief data guy. That's the route. Again, it's probably people versus money.
So speaking about this concept of people versus money, how would a retailer balance creativity and data and intuition in their marketing decisions when they're really making some critical decisions?
I'm a creative, so I love this question when I saw it written. I think you have to reverse that order, right? I think the ability for us to utilize data to understand where we put creativity, potentially how we scale creativity, how we make it more efficient, is critical. But the first, for us at least, and it's funny because we just started our first marketing work just went out yesterday. And I think we start with insights-driven creative. Like, what is compelling, what is beautiful, what is memorable, what messages land, as we mentioned earlier, for your segments. And then we would start to apply a data layer so that we can understand how to optimize, how to scale it, how we might create iterative versions of it, those sorts of things. So I still, maybe I'm a bit old-fashioned in this, but I think it starts with just a bloody good idea first.
And a little bit of data.
Yeah, there's no doubt. There's tons of data somewhere in there. And by the way, I might have misspoke a little, because certainly we utilize data to understand how we write a brief to create, campaign work. It's obviously fueled by data, but it isn't capital D data. That comes later in the process, I think.
No, but I think you're absolutely right that in the core of it, you have to start with like ground truth, or a basis of truth. If that's the season for electrical fireplaces, or everybody's buying a white coffee table, then that's the source, and then you take your creativity and you do something with it. But you want to start with whatever you know about what's working right now.
I do want to actually step back a bit for a second, because I did say I don't really love the answer I gave, basically saying if you're not a certain size, you can't do anything. What I would do, depending on budgets, if you were looking at online channels, is they offer professional tools. Now, those tools will be biased towards the platform in question, be it Google or Facebook or that sort of thing. But what you can do is you can take, say, your customer base that is consented for this type of thing, upload it and use that as a seed, and have those platforms themselves do essentially like lookalike finding and try to find similar people, and they're pretty good at it. You know, again, it'd be awesome if you could kind of do this on your own in some capacity, but again, these platforms have hundreds of thousands of people dedicated to these problems, and they do the algorithmic offerings on all the ad platforms are getting better and better in terms of trying to find your ideal candidate. So that's what I would do on a limited budget.
Alex,
And
can
I
I
think,
step?
yeah, Shannon, if I can just add
Yeah.
to the question, right? It's always difficult to figure out like how much data do we need to really drive decisions or make decisions, right? So it's always going to be, that's always a question of, you know, what's the right sizing there. But we usually also stress the fact that let's test out things, let's test out some concepts, right? Because at the end of the day, unless you test and learn, and then you can pivot and kind of figure out another success ways of handling different strategies, that's the way to do it. Sometimes data is not enough, or sometimes when you're learning from one test versus the other tests, you may not necessarily get good results. But that's the whole directional way of leveraging these informations to figure out like how do you turn that into tactics.
Alex, I heard Dan and Boaz come at the question of how do you balance creativity and data and intuition from two very different perspectives. I heard creativity first, I heard data first. Where do you land as a data marketer?
Kind of in between data and intuition, to be honest. I think one of the things you'll find with like measurement in particular, actually, even the Googles and the Facebooks and the Amazons of the world, they don't have attribution figured out. So I guess I should just like lay it out there. If you're confused and uncertain about how to allocate credit to a channel, it's because you're actually paying attention. And I think if anybody's telling you that they have some golden, like if they can tell you with all certainty, oh, put your money there and I guarantee you it's going to do this, like they're just flat out lying to you. So I think one of the things you'll find in most of the tools, especially the online tools, is they have limitations. And one of the nice things is if you understand what those limitations are, you can put your money elsewhere that might not. So, sorry, let me step back. When I there was a point where, believe it or not, Facebook was not seen as a viable advertising channel. And one of the reasons it was not seen as a viable advertising channel is that most of its conversions came from mobile and it came from impressions, neither of which was, or to be honest, till to this day, is tracked very well in something like Google Analytics. And so some savvy marketers at the time realized, hey, this is driving something for me, but it's not being captured in the tools of the day. And so that plays out over the course of a number of things for a variety of reasons related to the flaws in the tools themselves. The tools can't see everything. And so my sort of stance has always been, with some portion of your budget, if an advertising channel has reach and frequency, like if it has people and those people are viewing a bunch of ads, ads tend to work. And so I've always been kind of okay advocating for some portion of your budget being spent on those channels. And you just acknowledge that I'm not going to know what this is doing. and just being kind of okay with that. And that's more the intuition piece, just saying this channel has everything it needs to be to drive value for my business. And I might not be able to recognize it in any of the tools that I have today, but if there's a reason for that, e.g., I don't know, it's impression based and my tool only tracks clicks, then I'm personally okay with a bit of it's easy for me to say when it's your money, but that's sort of where I will use data to guide the majority of a spending decision, and then have a bit for intuition where I'm like, I think there's a gap here that could offer value to my business, and I'm willing to take that sort of intuitive plunge that can't be measured.
So closing up on this idea that there's some level of ambiguity in attribution, can each of you briefly share how are you individually helping retailers drive traffic, or how does your business help a retailer drive traffic?
I'm happy to start. Furniture.com has been built as a business purely to drive high intent audiences to our retail partners. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, you know, our business operates in that 73%, that murky space where people aren't searching by brand, but by attribute. Our site is built fundamentally to continue to build intent through AI and a variety of tools that help you filter and find the pieces you're looking for. And then that traffic itself becomes owned by our retail partners. So we're very, I don't mean to sound salesy, it's just we're very specifically set up to deal with the question you exactly asked. And then we're seeing from our early data that a lot of those shoppers are net new to the brand and that they convert very well. It all comes down to intent and understanding how to identify and grow it.
Thank you for that. Boaz, how does Bright Data help retailers drive traffic?
So I think Dan touched on a lot of it. We basically help them by identifying sort of the end game for them. So what's trending, what others are buying or selling, depending on the role. And if you know what is trending in search engine needs for the living room or for the bedroom or for the kitchen, and again, it by attributes, like Dan mentioned, by price tiers, then you can backtrack from it into replicating the success by advertising for it. And so it all starts with knowing what's in demand, making sure that you have the right offering within those price bands, within those attributes, and then backtracking into the right campaigns.
Thank you. And Vasant, how's Synchrony helping furniture companies find new buyers?
So I think it's important, right? So we are definitely helping them analyze trends, consumer behaviors, market dynamics. As I talked about promo optimization studies, because we understand the importance of credit, and showcasing the value of credit is very important because we know data has shown us attractive financing options drive traffic in the store, and it allows the retailers to be competitive.
Thank you. And Alex, how's Shopify helping furniture companies find new buyers?
There's two primary ways we're doing it. One, we call Shopify Audiences. It's essentially a tool that looks across a co-op of opted-in brands to try and understand who is a high propensity buyer for that particular brand. We then give those to you as audiences for you to target on ad platforms. We also have a tool that expands those retargeting audiences that I was telling you about earlier. So you can reach more of those people that otherwise you couldn't reach without it. We also have tools outside of audiences to manage like social media influencers, which have become a big part of certain brands as well. And so those are the two big ways that we help drive new customer acquisition.
I guess since I popped in, you're kind of getting the idea that we're getting close to the end here. I have to tell you, as I've been listening to this, there have been just a ton of takeaways. I've gone through almost a whole pen of ink here, jotting them down. So I really appreciate that. But the one thing that's been interesting, just as an observer today, is that, and I think you guys touched on it all a little bit here, is that we're talking about all this amazing technology, intuitive technology, all these things to sort of plug in. But you also talked about the need for everybody using it, every retailer, to be intuitive themselves because they know their customer, they know what's going on, and that's what I loved today. So it was really that nice balance. But gosh, tons of takeaways. I want to personally thank everybody. Shannon, great job. This was super informative and just absolutely terrific. But let's also thank everybody else around this very large cube we have today. I want to thank Vasant Adur, head of analytics for Synchrony, Home and Auto, their division there. Thank you so much, Vasant. We appreciate you being here. Boaz Grinvald, General Manager, E-commerce Analytics, Bright Data. You were great. We thank you for staying up with us about 6 time zones ahead. We appreciate that. Alexander Brazil, Senior Product Lead at Shopify. Alexander, thank you so much as well. We appreciate it. And Dan, the CMO for Furniture.com. We thank you, and we also thank you for making sure that the window was closed when the landscapers came. We appreciate that.
Yeah,
but a reminder, myhfa.org/webinar. This webinar and our entire library is there for you to access at any time. Please make sure you do. But as always, on behalf of Shannon and myself and everybody at HFA, we wish you 2 things. We wish you terrific health and great sales. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.